Hello world and welcome to episode 20 of The Top Split. I'm your host Alex McKellar and today we are talking all things stock car oval racing with my guest Edward Foster, who's one of the men behind the scenes of ANZ Oval Racing. Edward is part of a team that runs the ANZCAR League, which is really the hub of stock car racing in this part of the world. Now, I'm an oval newbie, and I was certainly pleased to be able to get some insights on the local scene and hear more about Edward's perspective on building and supporting a community in iRacing. I feel like we have some similar thoughts and approaches to things like this, so it was good to share and hear some of his thoughts on how to go about it. So without further delay, I give you Mr. Edward Foster. First off, I'd like to welcome Mr. Edward Foster, who is the man behind the scenes of the ANZCAR Stock Car Racing League, here to talk all things oval in the ANZ. Edward, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me. I'm one of a few guys actually behind that, but yes, thanks for having us on. It's looking forward to it.
Well, I did have a sticky beak at the league the other day, and I saw what I would assume is a mutual acquaintance, because I think he was one of the helpers in there. I used to call him, it was Mad Dog Racing, Steve Hoppett.
Steve Hoppett. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he was. He sort of came on board as a competitor in ANZCAR in the very beginning, and then came on board as an admin for a while too. Did a lot of commentary for us, and was known as the voice of ANZCAR for quite a while. And he's sort of just taken a step back a little bit recently, and he's focusing on his 131 Rock web radio channel that he does.
Oh, nice. I didn't know he did that. I used to know him as Quasi in R Factor days, many moons ago. He used to run Mad Dog Racing, and I used to race with him there. We had a bit of fun back there. I think he's local to me. I think he's in Canberra as well. So
he is.
It's such a small world, you know. These faces just keep popping up. It's interesting.
Anyway. Yeah, definitely, and he was one of those guys who was always great to have around as well. Good sense of humour and everything else. So always good whenever Steve was out there on the track. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a good fella too, and I remember him doing a bit of commentary as well in the old RRTV days. But maybe we'll talk about that a bit later. I am glad we managed to catch up in the end, and I do apologise. We've been talking about doing this since late last year, and I've been a little bit irregular, which I know I can be accurately pulled up on every now and then, but I'm glad we've got the chance to catch up anyway, because whilst I am a rank amateur when it comes to oval racing, so, you should expect a lot of dumb questions, and I apologise in advance. But I am glad to have you here, because I do want to talk and learn a bit about ovals, and also support you in your efforts to support the ANZ community, which is something we spoke about as well. But whilst I am a complete novice when it comes to ovals, I can say that as far as my limited experience goes, the intensity in oval racing, so the way I think about it, on a road course, I might, try and set up a pass, or I might have a thing here or there that, I go through one corner side by side every now and then, or you might have, at most sort of half a lap, and we think, oh, that was awesome racing. But in ovals, of course, from my experience and what I've seen, in coverage, both yours and on streams and what have you, they're side by side for laps at a time at incredible speeds. I mean, how do you keep your heart rate under control in that sort of scene?
Yeah, I mean, it's just something I suppose you get a little bit used to. I mean, people often, I guess in Australia and New Zealand, we're more familiar with the road racing side of things. It's sort of what we know. And people are always a little bit it's almost something unfamiliar to them. The whole idea of speedway racing and super speedway racing, stock cars, Indy cars, those kind of things. And it's just, I think the biggest difference between the two of them, strangely enough, is just the mental approach of it. Because when you're road racing, you've got to be very precise. There's one line. and that's the best line, and you have to be incredibly precise, work out your braking points, your acceleration, gear change points, everything like that, and just repeat that lap after lap after lap. And somebody gets in your way, you get in a battle with somebody, you're almost as good off ducking into the pits, and modifying your strategy a little bit. And it's generally the guy who implements their pre-race strategy the best that comes out with the best result. Whereas in oval racing, it's a little bit different, because you are just in that. First of all, you are in that pack of crazy drivers for most of the race. It's very, very difficult to break away from anybody. And the other thing is, especially since iRacing brought in the dynamic track, that has a really profound effect on an oval. And you don't have to necessarily be as precise as you would have to be on that single one ideal racing line as you are on a road course. But there can be about 5 different racing lines that work, and it's just up to you to read the track and really to kind of figure out what line is going to be working best, A, at this time of the race in these weather conditions, but B, with the setup of the car you've got and the amount of tyre wear that you've got, and everything else. And then, of course, you can be running a perfect strategy, and then the caution comes out and throws that all away. So most of this strategic thinking is actually done on the fly. You can go into the race with a bit of an idea about how you think it might turn out, but until you're actually in there, caution comes out and it just throws everything out the window, and you've got to improvise on the fly. So that's one of the things that you can love and hate about it, for sure.
So tell me, it sounds like with the ovals in particular, that the combination of the evolving weather and the changes in the track dynamics have really come into play to give it, I'd suggest even more sense of realism than you get on the road.
It's certainly it's like going from 2D to 3D. Really, it's really added a whole new dimension to the racing since they brought in that dynamic track, especially with the weather changes and dynamic weather shifting and the clouds coming over and so on that we've got through the races. It really does make a very big difference to how you run your race, and even how you approach racing with other people, the area of the track that you'd like to be on.
Yeah, well, it just strikes me that, like you say, with roads, often there's one road racing, I should say, is often just that one line. But I've seen, and again, I watch from afar rather than drive a lot of it myself. You see guys running the high line or the low line. I watch a bit of John Theodore from time to time, and I've seen him duck to the inside on a short track, and I think, oh dude, everyone's going past on the high side, and I'm sort of riding on board with him, backseat driving, if you will. And then you see the guys going around the high line and getting it done, and you think to yourself, that's so counterintuitive. What is it about running high versus low in that sort of scenario that sort of makes the high line work?
Well, generally speaking, if you run the low line, you're going to be faster into the corner and slower coming off.
Right.
Whereas if you're running the high line, you're going to be able to maintain your speed around the top of the track, not have so much accelerating to do, because you have maintained that speed around the top, and you're going to carry more speed onto the straight. So depending on the track and depending on all these other little bits and pieces, but all things being equal, let's just say hypothetical scenario, it was all completely even grip across the track and so on, that's generally what will happen. You'll be faster on the exits if you run high. But then also you've got tracks like Bristol, which have what they call progressive banking. So the track is actually banked less at the bottom than it is at the top.
Yep.
And NASCAR did that deliberately to try and introduce multi-groove racing to tracks that primarily used to run single file a lot.
Yep.
So it's really brought in the top groove, whereas in years gone by, the top side of the track was just absolutely no man's land.
Yeah, okay, makes sense. I mean, I watched your coverage most recent at the indoor. That was Bristol, wasn't it? The indoor circuit there, or it looked indoor. I don't know. Have they got a roof on that one?
No, it's just nighttime. That's all. Under lights.
Okay. Yeah, it looked like a big stadium, but and you could see that progressive banking was quite severe by then, almost like a velodrome. But and it has such an impact. But I also wondered about the dynamic track and on the bigger circuits, whether it has so much of a part to play. I mean, in a typical race, I suppose, what are the limits on the upper class sort of big oval races? What's the car limits on those?
In terms of numbers,
Yeah.
43, I believe.
43, so that's huge, but would that still sort of start developing a groove on a big track like that, as opposed to the small ones where, say you got 30 cars on there, for example, you'd expect barely an inch of the track to be unused at any time.
Yeah, generally you'll find, especially with a bigger field, you'll find that there's quite a number of grooves that come in quite quickly. Keeping in mind, of course, that having cars running over a section of track actually heats up that section of track as well. So
Mm-hmm.
that can actually cost you a little bit of grip. So it can, on occasion, be beneficial to go looking for the cooler part of the track, whether it be in shadow or whether it just be an area that hasn't been used so much.
Mm.
Once the car's going through, they actually start to clean it up, and it's no longer what you call a completely green surface.
Yep.
Then it can be beneficial to go looking for the cool stuff for sure.
Yeah, okay, interesting. Now, uh, the streams and what have you that I've been watching, particularly where you're watching some of the top guys. I mean, fascinated today to see the highest ever um, strength of field in oval. They had like a 7K off today, I think, or yesterday, or whenever it was. I just caught a glimpse of it, and these top guys often have. Like they do, I guess, in the real world, they have spotters running for them, helping them do their pit stops and all the rest of it. How much of it comes down to the pit strategy? I'll get onto tyre dig in a minute, but how much of a part does that pit strategy play? Do you think?
It's kind of difficult to use the word pit strategy because I guess that kind of implies that you are going into the race with a predetermined idea of how it's going to turn out and it's going to run.
Yeah.
But generally you're not looking at pitting under green. You'll try and save your pit stops if you can to the points where the cautions come out, and obviously that's the ideal time to do it.
Mm.
And it really comes down a lot of the time where if you're sitting back in the pack a little bit and you're just looking there and you're just going, okay, well, I'm just going to do what everyone else is going to do,
Yeah.
because you don't want to pit by yourself generally.
Mm.
Because if you come in and pit by yourself, say you're mid pack and you come in and pit alone, you're the only one that comes in, you're dropping all the way to the back of the pack.
Mm.
And everyone's going to go by you. And sure, you may have new tyres, but you may eat them up trying to get back to where you were.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're running mid-pack and you decide to pit and everyone behind you follows you, well, guess what? You're right where you were on fresher tyres than everybody ahead of you, and you're right behind them.
Yeah.
So you've lost nothing and just gained yourself a set of fresh tyres. So it really depends on what everybody else does as much as what you would like to do at that point in the race too. And I know definitely if you're just starting out in oval racing, it can be a really good strategy just to copy what the bulk of the field does.
Yeah, it's interesting because on the road side of thing, I've spent some time. One of the leagues that I race in had a Super 2 team engineer in it, so one of the V8 supercar, the feeder category. And he always said, a yellow flag period or safety car period, as obviously they call them, that's a free pit stop. You've got to jump all over that. But it sounds like it's very different in the world of ovals. But the tyre wear was the other thing I was thinking about, because in the road side of things, you see tyres heat up. And in endurance events, it's a bit of a factor, I guess. You will change your tyres. But in ovals, it seems to me, from what I've seen, that it's a really critical part of what you do in a race, and it can make a massive difference to what look on the surface of it to be simple layouts, but they can have a massive difference on where you finish in the race, whether you take 2 or 4 or any tyres,
Yeah, it certainly can. I think it's almost because of the simplicity of the layouts and so on that the freshness of your tyres, especially in a heavy stock car, that really you're getting 1 to 2 laps maximum of optimal performance out of a set of tyres before they start to drop away. And you can take the guy who is the slowest in the field and you put him on fresh tyres versus somebody who's been on a set of tyres for 30 laps. And keep in mind that a lap in stock car racing can be anywhere in between 17 and 25 seconds. It's
Yeah.
not a long period of time. But if you put the slowest guy in the field on a fresh set of tyres against a whole bunch of guys on 30-lap old tyres, he's going to lap you real quick. And it doesn't matter who he is. So it's something to keep in mind for sure.
Yeah, interesting. One thing that gave me immediate respect for oval races were my own dismal attempts at short track racing. Now, big tracks where you can keep flat to the floor, they're one thing, but I didn't really have an appreciation for how much skill is involved in short tracks. I mean, the tracks themselves look so simple, but I invariably found myself well off the pace and struggling. They're a really different kind of animal, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. And there are two types of drivers that do really well on short tracks. Number one is really good road drivers because, especially a short track like Martinsville, that's also quite flat, requires a braking technique that's actually very similar to a road course. We've got a couple of guys that race with us quite often who also do a lot of V8 supercars, and they're always ones to watch on those kind of short tracks.
Okay.
And they will generally separate. You'll find that the really good guys, the guys who've got an excellent feel for it and so on, do very, very well at the short tracks. I think personally that they are deceptively difficult. I quite often struggle myself in certainly in qualifying, just pulling that fast lap out on a short track because you've got so little to work with, and you've got to maximise every single little millimetre. And the best guys that we've got in ANZCAR and the best guys that you see around the world really shine on those short tracks.
Yeah, it's interesting because I imagine the skills between the two types of racing, as you say, are quite transferable. So it makes sense that they would, and yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I don't know if you might have listened to the interview that I did with, or the episode that I did with Mark Sambrose, and I didn't get the chance to ask him at the time, but I've heard him say that he felt that the NASCAR drivers were the best in the world, or certainly the best that he'd raced, if nothing else, and. It's interesting, and again, we look at it and probably write it off as being so simple, but it sounds and appears, certainly from my own experience, particularly on short track, that there's so much more to it, and it certainly gave me a bit of food for thought in that sense. But would you agree that the skills are infinitely transferable? Sounds like you might.
They are and they aren't. I guess when you do anything to its limit, to its absolute limit, then it's going to be difficult. And it doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter if it's standing on one foot for as long as you can. The moment you try and do something to the absolute limit, it's going to get harder and harder as you approach that limit. So it's not for me, I suppose, to agree or disagree with somebody of the stature of Marcus Ambrose. But in terms of the transferable skills, yeah, there are some transferable skills between the two of them. They are very, very different, but I think the biggest thing that actually differs between the two styles is actually the mental approach. A lot of people who come over from road racing, especially if they come into sort of the medium to higher speed tracks, and they still think that the best way to overtake is to dive in under brakes. And that's what you do on a road course to overtake. But if you try that on an oval, you're going to find yourself A, with no tyres, B, in the wall, and C, very, very slow down the straight if you do manage to do it, because it's just not the way it's done. And also that road course mentality of fighting tooth and nail for every single position because you might not get it back. You've kind of almost got to put that to the back of your mind when you're racing ovals, because if somebody gets past you, number one, you're not going to be able to hold them behind anyway, really, if they're faster than you. And number two, if they do get you, then if you've got the speed, you're going to have an opportunity to come back at them later on. So all is not lost. So it's a different mental approach more than anything else.
Yeah, I was going to say, like I'm just thinking amusingly from what I've seen, it also gives you time to think a fair bit. I know in road racing, the guys that are better at it, they get and they have all the muscle memory built in for a particular circuit or just for a particular car in general. They get that time to think about where they're going to position the car, several corners, if not laps ahead, right? I imagine with, and I don't want to downplay it by saying that the simplicity of the layouts and the many or the vastly greater volume of laps, you've got time to do that. But the other thing that I noticed is that you also get a lot more chat on the on the oval racing servers as well. Is that a peculiar thing to oval, or is it just the US guys that do it, or what do you think that's about?
I think it's probably because I tend to find most of the chat goes on during the caution periods. So
Mm-hmm.
I suppose you've got to have something to talk about while you're rolling around there at sort of 100k an hour or whatever, rather than full racing speed. But yeah, in terms of having time to think, I would say on the faster tracks, certainly the short tracks can present a little bit more of a problem to people because they're it's like the difference between driving Monza or Monaco. I
Yeah.
suppose Monaco, you're just constantly turning one way or the other. There's constant things coming at you all the time. Whereas I guess a longer oval would be a bit more like Monza. You've got the straights and you've got time to think and all the rest of it. I remember watching some of the videos done by Southpaw Racer
Yep.
on YouTube, and he did a little stint in ANZCAR just in our third tier series that we were running at that particular time with the K&N car.
Yep.
And that particular series runs on a lot of short tracks. And there was one point in one of the videos where, and he's done oval racing before, but he'd been out of it for quite a while, and he was just there, and he's saying in practice, I just cannot think fast enough for this. But yeah, it's just something you kind of work your way into, and short tracks are definitely a little bit more fast and frantic than some of the longer stuff for sure.
Yeah, I can bet. I mean, literally having to think, you're in such close proximity all the time, and so are the corners just coming smashing you one after another, sort of thing. I imagine it would fill your head pretty quickly. Now, you run the ANZCAR League, or with your team. I should correct myself from before. And that, from what I've seen, has at least a couple of events each week, from what I can tell. Can you tell everyone a little bit about the league?
Yeah, sure. So I guess if we're to go back to the beginning, it stemmed from a league that OSR were running. Jay Kennedy was doing a lot of the hosting for it. I think everyone knows Jay.
Yep.
And he was doing. You like to host different things on a Thursday night. It was kind of one of those nights where he put something different on, and he put on a truck series. And I sort of got involved in that and found that I was sort of semi-competitive, if not up there with the top guys, and I enjoyed it. And there are a few other guys like that.
Yep.
But the issue that you have when you're running a league like this, and the guys who run the dirt leagues will understand this perfectly well as well, and that is if you're running a road race, then if you've got somebody in the field who's not necessarily up to the task, and we've all seen them, they come in there with no practice and have clearly never even seen the track before. And they come in and they wreck. Generally, they only kind of bother themselves and whatever other unfortunate happens to be in the immediate vicinity.
Yeah.
But on an oval, that brings the caution out.
Yeah.
And you only need one or two guys like that to come in a field of 40 cars potentially, and it can ruin the race for everybody. And that's what was happening with the league that Jay was running.
Yep.
In that it was open to everyone, and people would come in, and of course his broadcast at SimSpeed V8's online as it was then is very popular, and people saw it on there and they wanted to jump in. You can't blame them, and they came in there, and it basically turned into races that were running 90% of their laps under caution.
Yeah.
And it was a disaster. And eventually, quite understandably, Jay's gone, look, this is going to take more work to put right than I've got time. He said, look, if anybody wants to pick it up from here, carry the torch, I'm more than happy to show you all the ins and outs of how to actually set these races up if you haven't done it before, but I'm going to go do something else.
Yeah.
And it was at that stage that Roger Clark, who's one of the guys who I run ANZCAR with right now, put his hand up and said, yeah, look, and he's an absolute NASCAR diehard. This guy loves it. And he's gone, look, I want to keep running this. And so he picked it up, ran a few races, got to the end of the season, and that's the point that I've sent him a message saying, look, what do you want this to be? Do you want to, what are your plans? Because I've got some ideas. And then we sort of got to talking, and then we sort of came up with a name, which was ANZCAR, to reflect the Australia and New Zealand connection to it, and came up with some race formats and so on. And after it sort of gained a little bit of its momentum back, I should say that we had had a guy called David Webb on board at that stage as well, who unfortunately wasn't able to continue on with us for too long because he had uni commitments and things like that. And we got Daniel Grzeskiewicz in after that. We just called him Danny G.
Yeah.
But yeah, when it started to get a little bit of momentum after that, we started to have the same problem where we were getting a lot of wrecks and the races were just not good. And so at that stage, we kind of looked around at what some of the other leagues were doing and had to think about what we could possibly do that could be adapted for stock car racing. What's working in the other leagues that we could adapt for what we're doing? And we took a little bit of inspiration for what the OSR guys do with their Dev series and Premier series for the V8s, and sort of looked at, okay, well, can we have a second tier with the best of them going into the top, into earning their way into the top tier, where hopefully the races are going to be a lot cleaner, and the people who are in there have proven that they can actually handle it. So that's what we went with, and it's taken a little bit of fine tuning here and there. So at the moment, we're running our top level series that you have to qualify for, which runs the top class Cup car, and that's running every second Thursday. And then on the alternate Thursday is actually the series that uses the B car or the Xfinity car, and that's the series that you have to run to actually qualify to race in the faster cars. And we've also just got a fun truck league, truck series that we run on the Monday, and we're kind of alternating that this year with a super late model series as well. So the truck series has just finished, and now we're into the super late model series. It's going to start in the next week or so. So, and there's a whole sort of promotion system sort of tied up in that. I won't bore you with the details with here, but suffice to say, it's designed to keep the quality of the field in the Cup series as high as we can.
That's awesome. Sounds like you got your hands full, that's for sure. But what does this? Do you? I don't know. I've wondered what the oval racing scene is like in official races. I mean, is there much action going on there, or is league racing really where it's at now?
Not in the Australia-New Zealand time slot. I mean, everybody would know that if you jump onto iRacing in the middle of the day on a weekend or something like that, in the time zones that are friendly to the Americans, you're going to find races that split 4 or 5 times.
Yeah.
But I would hazard a guess and say that if we were to check iRacing right now and have a look at some of the oval races there, I'd say you wouldn't get any going official. And that just seems to be the way it is. And I suppose it's understandable that in an Australian time zone, that V8 supercars and road racing and dirt, which is the stuff that we're familiar with in our countries, is going to be the go-to thing.
Yeah, look, I can imagine that being the case. That's why it sort of popped into my head. But I mean,
apologies for that. Just moving across to the AFK. So,
oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah, just moving into the AFK channel. So,
which is strange, given that we've been talking all this time. But anyway, we'll see how we go.
Yeah. We'll edit that out.
Yeah, we'll edit that out later, as you say. Yes. Yeah, I mean, it strikes me that might have been the case, given you say that our pedigree, our history is more on the road side of things. But it's great to see someone like yourself and your team putting in, what is a substantial amount of effort to get that scene, I guess, catered to that does exist. And obviously there is a desire for it to happen. Because it seems to be, from what I've seen, a pretty strong turnout and a strong league. And if you've got a development series and a top tier series, and that strikes me as a pretty good system as well, because you're giving that progression, and then people value being promoted to the top series. But that's full credit to you for putting that together as well. But now I mentioned Quasi before, Steve Hoppert, and it got me thinking there. It's a bit of a small world on that basis, but is the oval scene in ANZ, and obviously you've got the ANZCAR stuff to base that on as well. Is it pretty tight knit mob?
Yeah, I'll say so. I think the guys that we have never really gone out of our way to promote it in terms of going on the iRacing Down Under page or anything like that. We put things up every now and again, but we want it to grow via word of mouth
Yeah.
to the people that are really interested in it. The guys who are just going to come in, wreck a bunch of people, and then decide it's not for them and leave, we're not really looking to cater to them. We're looking for the guys who really want to be there and really enjoy this style of racing, or at least are serious about giving it a try. And we've definitely got a group that's been with us for quite a while now. I mean, most of the guys there are some guys that have been there since the very beginning, coming up to 2 years ago. It'll be 2 years in August since we started doing this.
Mm.
And yeah, I'd say it's a fairly tight knit group. We all get on pretty well. I mean, there can be some heated bits and pieces after races, but it generally gets swept under the rug pretty quickly. And that's due to also the fact that we have tried to set it up the way that real NASCAR set it up, with a sort of what they call in the States the let the boys have at it sort of attitude. So you're not going into it to review every single incident and hand out penalties the way that, say, for example, V8s or Formula One do.
Yep.
It's very much a case of do unto others what you would like them to do to you, because trust me, whatever you do to someone else, they will do back to you. And it becomes fairly well self-policing. If there's somebody comes in that wants to throw their weight around, the pack will teach them some pack justice very quickly.
That's cool. I was just thinking that, as with many communities, there's a culture that develops around it, and I imagine, particularly with oval racing, where it is all in close quarters, that everyone kind of needs to be on the same page for everyone to get a decent race out of it,
Yeah, definitely. And it's one of those things that comes as well with racing with the same people all the time.
Yeah.
You learn the people that you can trust and the people that you may have to give a bit wider berth to. I mean, there are guys that I will quite happily race millimeters from for lap after lap after lap, because you know they're not going to do anything stupid. They're just trustworthy. You've built up that trust with them over a period of time, and you know that you can generally, despite the maybe a little mishap here and there, but generally that you can race with them fairly safely and not have any issues. And then, of course, that's a lot different to if you jump into an official race and you don't know who you're getting.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I mean, we've, similar to what you've done, I guess, in terms of building a viable alternative, in this case, to the official series, where, you struggle to get a decent race and you've built something yourself. We, with our Sunday Night Lights now, used to be formerly Monday Night Lights, obviously, we tried to build something for the ANZ skippy community, and you get similar things, although it is built around the official series, and we're trying to get a competitive strength of field. We really had to rally the troops around to make a show of it. But you're right, when you start getting the same people turning up, you end up racing more or less with the same people, give or take. Whichever track you're good at, or you might have improved, or they've improved, or whatever. You end up with the same people. You get that camaraderie and that quality of racing where, as much as anything, and I think about this in terms of martial arts. When you're training or sparring with someone in martial arts, you kind of looking after your partner is your responsibility, and same way as you're looking after the race of the other person is your responsibility. Yes, you're going to be super competitive. Yes, you want to win, but it's not necessarily at all costs, because you know that next week or next race you're going to be next to the same person, and you want to be able to smile and shake hands at the end of it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that the guys you see you get, and you would probably find this yourself running the skippies.
Yep.
And I think it's something that every league goes through at some stage. I mean, when it starts up, there's a lot of hype around it, and people are jumping in left, right, and centre, and they will then fall into one of three groups. They'll fall into people who love what you do and will stick with you, the people who don't like what you do and will go and do something else,
Yep.
and the people who are sooks and expect you to change absolutely everything to suit them perfectly, and then give you a really hard time when you don't. And those people thankfully move on as well. And it's just one of those challenges of running a league. I think that a lot of leagues don't necessarily get through that initial period when they've got things flying at them from all angles. The people who aren't happy are saying this and that and all the rest of it. I guess the one piece of advice to give out to those guys is just sort of weather the storm. Keep your eyes on what you want it to be, the reason that you built it. Stay true to that vision that you had for it. And the people who love you will stay with you, and the people who don't will go elsewhere. And what you're left with is a whole bunch of people who love what you're doing. So
Yeah, yeah, I couldn't agree more. It reminds me a lot of concepts in leadership in general. You know, you will have a style and an approach and a concept that, you know, as we're talking about here, or a vision for it that people will identify with, and those people who essentially become your tribe, they will back you to the hilt. They will, you know, support and go through high and low periods with you, and you know, and that's what it's all about, building that platform, which is, you know, I really think you guys have done very successfully, and you know, and that's you know, giving people a lot of opportunity there to that otherwise wouldn't exist. And you know, I think about the other thing that you do that's similar to us, which is you have your broadcast style stream of your events on YouTube. It can be pretty challenging to get that all sort of running smoothly. Is that what you found in setting all that up?
yeah, it certainly has been, I guess, a learning experience for everyone involved. I mean, we've been quite fortunate in that we've got some more people who sort of jumped in, put their hand up, guys who understand a bit about streaming and a bit about how to do overlays and those kind of bits and pieces. But of course, back when we first started, we had our mutual friend Bernie
Yes,
Weemers
that's
doing
what we
the.
did.
And I believe, if memory serves, and you can correct me on this if I'm wrong, that our very first ANZCAR broadcast, you actually co-commentated with Bernie.
I think I did. Now that you mention it,
Mm.
and given my lack of experience and knowledge of it, I tell you what, it was quite an experience. But yeah, look, it was fun. I can remember it, but you know, you're right. We do share our common roots in the Double RTV family, and both of us, as it turns out, kind of built on that once the great man himself pulled up stumps. You know.
Yeah, and it was one of those that when I sort of had regular conversations with Bernie, of course, during his time broadcasting us,
Yep.
and it sort of became apparent throughout the I guess the final few weeks of when he decided to cease doing it, that it was just sort of getting to that stage where he perhaps had enough.
Yep.
And given the amount that guy took on alone,
Yeah,
you
I
can
know.
completely understand exactly why. I mean, he was broadcasting 5 nights a week
Yeah,
by himself.
I
You
know.
know, so it was an absolutely massive task for him to take on. And when he decided to stop it, we were in the situation where we had quite a few reasonably sized teams coming
Mm.
in, and they also came with their sponsors,
Mm-hmm.
and they came in. I'm not privy to their conversations, obviously, but one would assume that they came in on the basis of there being a certain amount of exposure
Yeah, yeah.
for that sponsorship. And between a lot of us, we sort of felt the obligation that we needed to sort out an alternative out of I guess a sense of loyalty to those teams and sponsors that were investing in us.
Yeah, sure.
So we had a bit of a look around, and really there were no sponsors for the series that were doing anything at that stage more than just sort of paying hosting costs, which as you know are not huge.
Yeah.
And we didn't have any kind of way of really going ahead and paying a few $100s to another broadcaster to bring that on. So we sat around and had a bit of a think about it and thought, well, we followed the model of some of the others so far. So how about we look at broadcasting the thing ourselves? And we went out and learned about it and brought a couple of guys in. We brought in a guy called Matt Hunter who races with us, and he's really, really clued in with all of that sort of stuff, and he puts in a massive amount of work behind the scenes, doing overlays and
Mm.
doing instructional videos for all the rest of us, so we can sort of pick up to the level that he knows, and loads of different stuff like that. He works furiously behind the scenes, and we've got Carl Withy who helps us out with some commentary and some streaming as well. So those guys jumped in. We had other guys come in just willing to commentate here and there. It allowed me to get back into the commentary side of things, which I tried out as co-commentator first of all to with Bernie,
Yep.
and found out I sort of enjoyed that. So it's allowed me to keep doing that as well. So yeah, there are a lot of positives to it, and the good sign is, we've still seen that inflow of teams. That a lot of the teams that are running in ANZCAR are very well backed now. I mean, the team that I race for, Blokes Advice Racing, we've got Blokes Advice there on board. We've got EMR Industries on board, and a lot of the other teams that are running in the series have similar levels of backing as well. So it shows that whatever we're doing, it's proving to be of value to them as well, which is great.
That's great, and it sounds like you've got a good team around you as well. I know towards the end there, Bernie was frustrated that people would sign up to have him do these series, and on the premise that they'd have someone there to co-commentate with him and help him out. And it's a small thing to do, but unless you got that team of people that are willing to do it, it makes it hard. And I know. I'm pleased to see that, for example, someone like yourself is doing a bit of the commentary, but then also getting back out on track. Because one of probably the best piece of advice that Bernie ever gave me was, don't give up your seat time, And for me, I love doing my racing. I give up the biggest race of the Skippy Week now to do the commentary, but I do that willingly because I still get out there and get on the track. I can't imagine, as you say, doing it 5 nights a week like he did. It would have, and I know he ended up selling his rig and all the rest of it, and that's a path we've all got to be wary of, because it can kill the passion and the love for it, which I still reach out to Bernie and hope that we can get him back on the track, because he's a great loss to the community. But on another note, I know you're doing the broadcasting, you're talking about that. I want to compare a few notes here. What sort of tools do you guys use for your broadcasting and your overlays?
ATVO we use.
Perfect. Yeah. I use the same thing. Have you had a chance to crack under the hood of that? I mean, I do all our overlays myself, and I like the flexibility and the control that I have with it, but it's a complicated animal to get under the hood of.
I've had some looks at it in terms of bits and pieces of actually just understanding how it works, just so I could understand if at any point I needed to tell anyone else. But really, Matt is the guru as far as that's concerned. He's probably forgotten more about that kind of thing that I'll ever know. So he's very, very clued in with it, and I'm quite happy to leave that side of things to him. So I mean, I've had a poke around, which lasted about an hour,
Yeah.
and that's the level of my understanding of that program. So
Best things about leadership, knowing your strengths and how to delegate to someone who's got them more than you. Yeah, so that's good. Look, something that's been bugging me lately is I've been having a lot of trouble with YouTube, of all things. They've just been, I don't know. I've actually ended up having to switch to Twitch for the time being, and I might actually do it permanently. And I even saw SimSpeed the other day had a few problems, but I don't know that theirs was related to YouTube. You guys all smooth sailing as far as that's concerned?
Yeah, we haven't had any issues. We've always meant to branch out to doing Twitch and so on as well, but there've been other little things sort of propping up, keeping us away from, I guess, focusing on progressing it. Just sort of, you go through those phases where you're just kind of frantically trying to tread water with everything and keep everything sort of working and getting personnel in when you need, and so on, that you don't really get the opportunity to try and expand things. But in direct answer to your question, no, we haven't had any issues with YouTube.
No, half your luck, mate. I've had them to the point where I think it's something at the ingestion end. I just don't get the bandwidth, and the thing looks garbage. And so I think I'll stick with Twitch for now, but we'll see how we go. But certainly from what I've seen, you guys are doing a great job with the broadcasts, and it's a great support to the ANZ Oval community. And I think we've sort of touched on it before. Without this sort of involvement, people won't necessarily have that outlet to race, other than those times on the weekend, perhaps. And that having that local scene to race on is such a great thing to have. And it looks to me like you've built a good community around your league, and it's somewhat of a hub for all things oval in ANZ. Can you tell people who are listening to this, how do they get involved? If they're sitting on the sidelines, they've always wanted to get involved in oval racing, but haven't been able to find a race. How do they get involved?
Well, the first thing that you do is go onto iRacing and look up the ANZCAR League and join that. Then you'll be eligible for everything but our Cup Series, which is actually run just for ease of administration to manage that field. It's actually run as a separate league called ANZCAR Cup. But the first one that you can actually just go in there and join is ANZCAR. So yeah, make sure you've got yourself a car and got yourself most of the tracks, and or at least the tracks that we're going to run. We can always supply you a schedule, and join the league and come out for some laps.
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure that we've got all the links and what have you can throw at me in the description of the podcast below for those of you listening. Now, before I set you free tonight, Edward, beyond the ANZCAR League or perhaps the people involved, is there anyone or anything you'd like to let people know about? Maybe acknowledge sponsors or the ANZCAR team itself?
Yeah, well, I think I mentioned the team members earlier on, but there's just such a, and it's something that you touched on a little bit earlier on about the level of community that's built up around it, because we've got to the stage now that there've been a number of drivers who've been in there for that long that they actually care enough about the league and about the series and everything like that, is that they come to us fairly often with their own suggestions and ideas and things on how to improve it and other things that they'd like to see done, and have you thought of this? And I've never run another league, so I can't tell you, but I should imagine that a lot of them don't have that level of engagement with people where they actually care enough about it that they really invest in it the way that our guys are more serious guys have invested with us. So I guess it's a public opportunity for me to say thank you to all those guys, the guys who come out and race every week and really care enough about the league and really treat it as their own, that they come out and really engage with us and try and help us to run things and improve things and everything else. Because at the end of the day, it's not like a real life motorsport, which caters very strongly towards the fans and everything else. Because in sim racing, it's as simple as a click of a button and you can leave and you can go race something else. So it's about the competitors. And when we started this, we always said from the beginning that the focus was going to be on the enjoyment of the competitors. And it's those guys that make the league what it is. Otherwise, it'd just be me, Roger, and Daniel driving around by ourselves. So, big thank you to them. And I believe I mentioned earlier on 13 Run Rock, which was Steve Hoppett's channel. He does a bit of sponsorship of ANZCAR through that channel as well, and always great to have him around, even when he's not racing, to still to have him involved. So another thanks to him. And if you're into your old school rock, go check that out, because it cranks.
Awesome, excellent, thanks, mate. Thank you very much for joining me tonight, Edward. Part of our messaging back and forth has been, our cross-promoting and supporting of the iRacing community in ANZ. And hopefully with this, we might get some folks that are busting to find some oval racing come beating down your door. Maybe even some who hadn't thought about it, before, and maybe we'll give it a go. In my mind, the ultimate goal is just to get people out on track having fun. It doesn't matter to me what form of racing that takes, as long as they're driving with a smile on their face. So thank you once again for joining me tonight, ANZCAR's own Mr. Edward Foster. So there you have it, folks. That was ANZCAR's own Edward Foster. I tell you, I found it really nice to talk to someone who has a lot of the same experiences that I do in iRacing, in so much as he's on the front line of just trying to get people out on track and enjoying online racing. We discussed it a little bit, but I really feel like without the ANZCAR scene, it would be just so much more difficult for oval enthusiasts to get a drive in ANZ. With the focal point that they provide, it does give folks the opportunity to try out that form of racing, and with the structure they give it, I reckon it gives drivers the best chance of finding good quality racing at a level that suits their ability. I admit, even I was a little inspired to give it a run. I'm actually toying with the idea of perhaps having a crack at it, and given they have an entry-level event regularly where you could learn the ropes before potentially running with the big boys, it sounds like a great way to perhaps try it out. I say it every now and then, but in amateur clubs of all kinds, be it sporting groups or enthusiasts of any kind, there are always those people that beaver away behind the scenes, and without whom so many people would just miss out on the opportunities and the outcomes that they support. In this case, I can imagine the oval scene in the ANZ region would have an entirely different landscape without Edward and the ANZCAR team putting together the activities and the league the way they've done it. I hope that those who hear this that are involved might take a small moment to reflect on that and maybe think about showing their appreciation at some point. I'm sure many do, but something as simple as a thanks for all your effort kind of thing at some stage really goes a long way. I know that even though I'm not a part of the oval racing scene in ANZ, I'm actually really grateful for the guys from ANZCAR being there, simply because I can see that platform that they've created gives so many people a chance to race. And for me, that's the sort of thing I get a kick out of, just knowing that it's there. I can tell you that from my conversation with Edward before, during and after the podcast, he's immensely passionate about his racing, and I think that having people turn up and race would absolutely put a smile on his face. So congrats to Edward and all the ANZCAR guys for what they do for ANZ stock car racing. I hope that in doing this, we can reach some people that either haven't considered life on the ovals or maybe just didn't know about the ANZCAR League itself and now know where to get a race. All the links with the details on how to get involved are in the description of the podcast below. Speaking of community type things, I had an example of what I was just talking about in relation to the impact that small words of appreciation can have. The skips have been at Bathurst this week, and I've been having more than my share of fun racing the mountains. Been really, really a lot of fun this week. I was in a practice session earlier in the week, and someone said g'day over the radio. We spoke briefly before we loaded into the oncoming race session. In that short time, he said to me that he really enjoyed the podcast, and being a Tassie boy, had really enjoyed the Marcus Ambrose episode. Above even that, listening had got him back into iRacing and out on track in the skippies. For me, above all else, that is why I do this. It's why I do all the things around Sunday Night Lights. I imagine it is a massive factor in why Edward and the ANZCAR guys do what they do as well. It's to get the word out there that sim racing is great fun and simply to try and inspire people to get out there on track. Like I said earlier, something simple like a few words in a practice server like that was a real kick along for me this week. So thank you, Andrew, for that. I really appreciated it. Now, a quick word on Sunday Night Lights before we go. We're at the halfway point of the season now at 6 weeks in. In terms of the move to Sunday nights, it's been a massive success. Even with a large cohort of the previously top-end drivers of the category boycotting it now because of the time model changes, and don't get me started on that again, we're still getting a fantastic turnout of drivers supporting the series and some amazing racing to show for it. The Interlagos race from round 5 was one for the ages. If you ever wanted to know what Skippy racing is all about, go check out that race. It's on the Top Split YouTube channel, and everything you could ever ask for is in that race for sure. It's been very satisfying for me to see the support we've been receiving from those who have stuck with us in the skips, and it's a ringing endorsement in my mind when the strength of field of the SNL race outstrips the nearest other race of the week by near on 1,300. And the average strength of field for an SNL race this season has been over 4,000 for the entire season.
It's over 9,000!
No, Vegeta, it's only 4,000, but hey, there's still time. Anyway, as far as the standings go, well, the Scandinavian onslaught is upon us with the smurfing Sammy J on top of the table at the moment. It's actually really great to see the likes of Sammy Toikala out on track more often. He's had an amazing run to this point of the season, having started out in the second split with a couple of wins there, then moving up to the top split with a further couple of wins on top of that. Only an uncharacteristic mistake this week just gone, costing him a really good chance of a runaway win for making it 3 this season in the top split as well, which would have made 5 out of the 6 weeks he'd had a win. So, Sammy's really putting on a show to this point of the season at least. Literally just 1 point behind him, however, is Håkon Grebstad, who, after Smurf and Sammy's self-destruction last week, took out his second top split win of the season at Motegi. And what I thought actually was a really great display of defensive lines, particularly early in the last lap when it really counted. And he really just left the other three drivers in that front pack fighting for the podium scraps over the line. Hawkon showing, really what a bit of patience and smart driving can lead to on that occasion for sure. In third place, just 4 points off the lead, is Teemu Vaskalampi. Again, it's great to see Teemu out on track in our more accommodating Sunday night time slot. Whilst he's yet to take out a win in this season, Teemu is most definitely well and truly in the hunt for the SNL title this season. Anthony Catt and Sebastian Schultz round out an all-international top 5 after 6 rounds. In fact, it's not until we get to P7 that we find the first ANZ driver in Team Milo's own Ben Snell. Ben has had a mixed bag of results this season. Ben, of course, joined me last episode for my rant on the current state of play in the skips, and it's been people like Ben who have stuck with us through all this that help make it worthwhile for me, certainly. The other one to watch in P9, at least in terms of the ANZ competitors, is Tim Gorkrotcher. He's only managed 3 races this season, but I've got to tell you, he's got some pace to burn, that's for sure. He was somewhat cruelly robbed of victory at Interlagos by a racing incident. He and Teemu came together, but given the opportunity to make more appearances in the second half of the season, he's really got a genuine chance of making a run at the title with his pace and when drop rounds start coming into play. So there is hope for the ANZ Skippy contingent, even if at the moment we are chasing the Scandinavian Flyers at the top of the table for the time being. Thank you again to everyone who continues to support the Sunday Night Lights. We've had our issues with the YouTube broadcasts, but now we've made the move to Twitch on what could end up being a permanent basis. I feel like we're ready to rock and roll again. Certainly, the drivers are doing their part, and it's been a great pleasure to try and shine a light on the great racing that they've been putting on. If this sounds like your cup of tea, you can join in on the Sunday Night Lights action either on track by joining the official Skip Barber race each week at 9:15 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, which is GMT plus 10. Make sure you check the forums, the Skippy forums on the iRacing site, where I post a world clock link each week where you can add your local time to make sure you get the right race. And I know it's even caught out some SNL veterans lately, so it's easy to do. The other way to join us, of course, is for the live broadcast that is now on the Top Split TV Twitch channel, which obviously it's live, so it's at the same time. Just search for Top Split TV, all one word, on the Twitch website, and that's where you'll find us. Or again, check out the SNL forum thread on the iRacing Skip Barber forum for all the details. You can always join us to keep up to date with all the latest SNL happenings on the Top Split Discord server or the Top Split Facebook page, where I post links to all the live broadcasts. And remember, now that we are live on Twitch for the broadcasts, I do still post the broadcast replay on the Top Split YouTube channel, so you can catch those and all the old SNL and MNL seasons there as well. I'll pop all the links to the description of the podcast as usual below. Thank you for sticking with me to this point. Thank you also again to Edward Foster for joining me for this episode. Again, if you've ever thought of giving stock car racing a try, check out the ANZCAR League. I can think of no better way of getting up and running. For now though, I've been your host, Alex McKellar, and you've been listening to The Top Split. Until next time, I will say ciao for now.